Today we are going to talk about the OG Pyro Main DPS in Genshin Impact. Oh no, not him, but the one from Liyue, who is part of their big tree, Hu Tao. The second phase of Genshin Impact's version 5.1 is out now. That means our quirky director of Wangxing Funeral Parlor is having her rerun, together with one of the top supports in game, Nahida. This banner is actually insane, even the 4 stars. Tao was released in version 1.3 in 2021. It's just crazy to think that it's more than 3 years now. That means after 5 versions and 6 regions, there are tons of new overpowered and let me say power creeping DPSs that were released. One of which is very comparable to a Tao. It's the Knave. Fourth of the Harbingers, Arlecchino. Hi, this is Earlbedo. In this video, we will be comparing Hu Tao with Arlecchino. I'll discuss their similarities and differences, their pros and cons, and how the other is better than the other, to help you decide whether to pull for Hu Tao or just wait for Arlecchino's rerun, or to answer if you should pull for Hu Tao even if you already have Arlecchino. Just a disclaimer, this video is not a how to use guide, but rather a comparison video. To be objective, we will not compare their design, stories, and personalities. Instead, we will focus on their role and kit and overall value they add to your account. Also, as usual, most of my recommendations are for F2Ps and low spenders. Let's go through some of the reasons why these two powerful DPSs are often compared. First, and the most obvious reason is because they are both Pyro Main DPSs. They're one of the strongest, if not the strongest, in their respective element. And they're both S-tier DPSs even for non-Pyro characters. Both of them have incredibly high damage ceilings that can annihilate the Spiral Abyss. They also both use polearms. Next, Hu Tao and Arlecchino both have high risk and high reward gameplay and combat mechanics that I personally enjoy, which we will talk about shortly. Lastly, they both ascend with crit damage and have a passive that increases their pyro damage as a testament of their role as main DPSs. They are very similar in many ways, but now let's briefly talk about their kit and gameplay to know their differences and also to discuss their pros and cons. Hu Tao is a charge attack focused unit. Once you use her skill, her normal, charge, and plunging attack will be converted to pyro, and she will greatly increase her attack based on her HP. So technically she is not full HP scaling unit since what happened is she just increases her attack, on which her damage is based on from her HP. Regardless, most of the time we still stack HP on her instead of attack since the return on this is higher. It is important to know that at C0, she consumes stamina when doing charge attack. It sounds fairly easy to do jump or dash cancel to manage your stamina, right? But I'll be honest, in reality it's very challenging and difficult, plus this doesn't always apply to all situations. There are a lot of times that even if I'm doing it, there are still few charge attack hits I'm missing since I do not have stamina anymore, resulting to a huge DPS loss. If you're hitting around 80 to 100,000 let's say with her, and you're missing 2 charge attack, that means you're losing 200,000 worth of damage, which is a lot. It's just a bummer that we need C1 to address this. There are 2 reasons why I said that she has a high risk, high reward gameplay. First is because once you activate her skill, her HP will decrease by 30% of her current HP, which I think is a lot. Next reason is more forgiving but might still be challenging. Her passive requires her to have 50% HP or less to have an increased pyro damage bonus by 33%. If you also have her signature weapon and best in slot, Staff of Homa, it also has the same requirement for an additional attack bonus. But the good thing is, her elemental burst lets her heal herself, so it's a good emergency measure when your HP is very low. And for a character that was released more than 3 years ago, her charge attack damage is still considered very strong. Not only that, she was able to adapt to some of the new mechanics like having a plunge attack gameplay with Shanyun and even with Bennett. It's funny because there are times that her plunge attack deals higher damage than my Xiao team. It's just a testament that even for an early release main DPS, her kit is future proof. What's good with Hu Tao is, aside from being a good DPS, she has some supportive capability. Her other passive provides the team with 12% crit rate once her skill ends. Just so you know, this is very rare ability and is very useful for her team since she is usually accompanied by strong Hydro and sub DPSs that need crit rate too, specifically Xingqi, Yalan, and Furina. So, in summary, here are her pros and cons. Let's start with the good things first. As I mentioned earlier, she ascends with crit damage and she also has a very high pyro damage bonus which is built into her kit, so stacking other stats like crit rate, HP, and EM is a lot easier. If built right, she has a very high damage potential that is higher than most DPSs on average. Speaking of builds, she has a very good artifact sets you can choose from, one of which is the Shimenawa set, which is so worth it to farm for since the emblem of Severed Fate is in the same domain. So you can simultaneously farm for her and her sub DPSs like Yelan or Xingqi. Next, she has the ability to heal herself too, which is more than enough. Although she is a charge attack focused DPS, performing charge attack lets her inherently perform a normal attack first, which means she can trigger Xingqi and Yelan's burst, which is essential to trigger Vape. She can also utilize other gameplay like plunge gameplay as I have shown earlier. For a small girl, she is quite tanky since most of the time we stack HP on her. Lastly, Hu Tao can provide crit rate to the team, which is again a rare ability. Now for the not so good part. Although she can heal herself, her HP drain can be a problem if you do not have a shielder or if you are not good at dodging like me. Since aside from trying to be alive, you also have to make sure that your HP needs to be below 50%. It's very easy to comment and say just to learn to dodge, but in reality, managing her stamina while dodging can be difficult for players in general. If you're good at this, then good for you. And another thing to consider is one of her best supports, which is Furina, has HP draining mechanics too, so it might be more difficult to maintain her HP with her. Next, at C0, you have to make sure to manage her stamina well. Otherwise, you'll lose a lot of damage and waste your precious time. Hu Tao is not very flexible in terms of team comps. Although she can work with Plunge team, her best team is Vape team. And that's it. She doesn't really work the best with Mono Pyro or Overload teams and especially Burning teams. So in a sense, you are forced to play her with Vape only. But overall, I think Hu Tao is a well-rounded character with a good balance of having a very good damage, but also not being so brain rot and easy to use, unlike some people there, while also providing a level of support to the team. Before we continue, if you are enjoying this video, please subscribe to my channel because I make Genshin Impact guides like this almost every week. Now, let's talk about the next character, who I think is one of the strongest character in game right now, Arlecchino. Her kit is a little more complicated than Hu Tao because she utilizes the relatively new mechanic called Bond of Life. I won't fully discuss how this works, but basically when you have Bond of Life, you can get certain buff in exchange of not being able to be healed unless the Bond of Life is gone. When you use Arlecchino's elemental skill, she will mark the enemies. When she does a charge attack, she will get Bond of Life. But if you wait a little longer, she gets more Bond of Life. Bond of Life is very important to her skill because when she has this, it will convert her normal, charge, and plunging attack to Pyro, just like Hu Tao. And again, just like Hu Tao, she also gains higher Pyro damage bonus at 40% while in combat. That is almost one Pyro damage goblet. Also, if you hit enemies with normal attack, her skill cooldown decreases. And her damage at this state, even at low level and low skill level, and even when using a 3-star weapon, is insane. When built right, her damage and speed is out of this world. Her total DPS is one of the highest, if again not the highest, even beating Hu Tao. But this comes with a price, of course. Just like Hu Tao, she has a very high risk, high reward gameplay. When Arlecchino is in combat, her teammates cannot heal her. This poses big problems on her gameplay, mainly to her survivability. Without a shielder, it might be harder to keep her alive than Hu Tao, especially when paired with Furina. On the other hand, her other passive gives her resistance to damage based on her attack. But really, you won't really feel this if she is dying in the Spiral Abyss. Although she cannot be healed, she can heal herself through her burst. But unlike Hu Tao, her HP is harder to maintain without a shielder, since she is less tanky. Lastly, I think one of her very cool features is her charge attack animation, which allows her to travel even above water. Let's take a look at this very cool halfway. Now that you know how she works, here are her pros and cons. As a main DPS, one of the good things about her kit is she is sensed with crit damage while also having an inherent 40% pyro damage bonus, which allows us to stack other stats like crit rate and attack. Hu Tao and her are very similar in this part. She also has a higher damage ceiling than Hu Tao, and actually than most of the DPSs in game. Not to mention, her normal attack is fairly fast and easy to use without shenanigans. But just imagine being faster than Hu Tao and also dealing more damage. Speaking of normal attack, since she is normal attack focused, she does not need stamina management unlike Hu Tao. And compared to Hu Tao, she is also more flexible in terms of team comps. She does not work well with plunge teams, but she works well with almost all pyro related reactions. Obviously, one of her best teams is Vape. She also works well with Overload, especially with Chevreuse. Emily also works well with Arlecchino in burning teams. Just take a look at this. Even using her without elemental reactions, she still outputs huge damage with the right support and build. And she is also very easy to build. Although she has her best in slot artifact set, you can just slap Gladiator's Finale to her and she will still deliver. And I know I already mentioned, but even using a 3-star weapon White Tassel, she will still perform very well. I'm not kidding. I think one of her pros is her charge attack animation that is good for exploration. Sadly, all that goodness comes with a price. Here are her cons. The obvious one is her passive that prohibits her from being healed by her teammates, although this can be easily fixed by having a shielder. That means healers and healers artifact sets like SODP are not very useful for her. I have not mentioned earlier, but her damage when she has Bond of Life scales up her attack and her Bond of Life percentage. This is very trivial, but this means that her damage is a little more inconsistent than Hu Tao. I said trivial because you will not notice this at all because her damage is just as good, but I think it's worth mentioning. Arlecchino is a monster, both in the story and in game. It's just crazy to think that well-rounded characters like her exist in Genshin Impact. Now, let's weigh all the things that we talk about and see which one is the better DPS for you. Let me create a checklist for you to decide. If you do not have either of them yet and you want a charge attack and vape focused DPS that can also do massive plunge attack damage, who has a little support utility, more survivability because she's tankier, then definitely pick Hu Tao. But if you want a normal attack focused character that can reach insane damage even with trash artifacts, someone that is more flexible in terms of team comps, slightly better exploration, and if you want a little challenge, I think you should choose Arlecchino. But what if you already have Arlecchino and you're an FTP or low spender? Should you pull for Hu Tao? My answer is no. Do not pull for Hu Tao if you already have Arlecchino if you're an FTP or low spender. Aside from the fact that Arlecchino is very similar to Hu Tao, she is more flexible and has a higher damage. The Pyro Archon's release is just around the corner too, so I would recommend just saving your primos for MEOW instead. And that way you have one of the strongest DPS and potentially a very strong Archon in your team. But of course, if you have the resources to pull in this banner or you really like Hu Tao, then feel free to pull for her. We reached the end of the video. Again, this is Earlbedo. See you next time!